On my 7th birthday, I was given a small 50cc motorcycle. Well, I suppose I shouldn't say a motorcycle. It was actually a bicycle frame with a small motor attached and a piece of plywood for a seat that was ingeniously upholstered with some leftover carpet my stepfather had from revamping the house. Nevertheless, this motorcycle was mine, and it presented me with an opportunity of a lifetime: movement. I lived in a rural country town where there were more cows than people and more gravel than pavement, and the act from getting from point A to point B could be quite exhausting, but not anymore. I could now speed over miles of Appalachian landscape and charge up mountains with a single thrust of my wrist. I had superpowers, or at least that's what it felt like at the time. And from there, my obsession with the road began. At the age of 16, I was handed down my first car. It was a beater, and there was no greater feeling than gripping the steering wheel and collaborating with this machine to propel both of us toward a common goal: escape. On July 6, 2001, while serving at Fort Hood, Texas, I took a pair of scissors and I cut my once perfectly pressed Army uniform into a pair of low-hanging shorts. I didn't question it one bit. I was making the most important decision of my life, and I made it in an instant. Shortly after, I took to the road with the only one I knew I could trust with my life: my car. I was heading north at over 100 miles an hour when the state of Texas disappeared from sight. I was officially AWOL, absent without leave. For the next 6 months, I drove across the country a fugitive, a deserter in a time of war. I sped over thousands of miles of American highway, my size 14 nailed to the gas pedal. Awake, I had no thoughts of death, yet strangely, I dreamt of death every time I closed my eyes. I had been running on all cylinders, but it appeared it all had to end. Not because I wanted it to. No, it had to stop because of a sickening feeling in my stomach. A sickening feeling that was getting worse by the minute. A lump had formed and grown from the size of a pea to the size of a plum. I had no choice but to turn myself in and seek medical attention. 48 hours after my return to Fort Hood, I'd gone under the knife to remove the mass that had manifested inside of me. After the surgery, I was numb from the waist down, and my mobility was limited to the 16-inch rims of a wheelchair for almost 2 weeks. I waited for my treatments to begin with disbelief, depression, and a foggy delirium of self-medication. They say that men are in their sexual prime between the ages of 18 to 25, and in that, my ego took the biggest hit. I was 19 years old and days away from being diagnosed with testicular cancer. So much for my prime. Before the battle began, I was urged to ejaculate into a small plastic cup to save for the future. Is that going to be enough? I asked the doctor. It should be fine. It's fine. My ability to someday have children was now completely up to a sample that should be fine. On the morning of my first treatment, Sergeant Miller wheeled me from the military barracks to the car. Miller and I were friends, and often I'd go to his home to have dinner with his family, a wife and 2 daughters. He was a great father and a husband, and I admired him for that. On this morning, he didn't joke or act as he would normally, which was like a brother or a cool uncle. Instead, he was gentle and treated me as if I was one of his children. As we approached the car, the reality of it all finally hit me. Today, I would not be touching my steering wheel. Today, I would sit passenger in my own car. Miller lifted me from my chair and placed me inside. I screamed with frustration as I knew I wouldn't be driving anytime soon, nor living, because life for me was at miles per hour. I rolled the window down and sat in silence and allowed the cold air to keep me from crying. We arrived to the oncology wing of the hospital, and Miller handed me off. A female nurse wheeled me through the lobby where the typical patients were. Extremely aged, sickly men and women were everywhere, all on the verge of death, and all appearing to be fine with it. I was the ultimate contrast to this place. I was only 19. I didn't belong here, and everyone that saw me stared at something was abnormal. She wheeled me down the hall and began to speak in a softer voice than before, and with that I knew something bad was about to happen. People always talk like that when something bad is about to happen. "I'll be just outside waiting for you," she said. "I'll be just outside." She said it twice for reassurance. 2 men and a woman entered the room, and I was stripped naked immediately. It's crazy to think that I was the guy in high school who showered with swim trunks on, who peed in the stall rather than the urinal with fear that someone would peek, and who quite possibly was the most uncomfortable boy while naked. And now, just a year removed, I found myself completely exposed to strangers, my body covered in red and silver paint in the form of a grid so the doctors could line up the machine. They placed me on a steel table no wider than my teenage body. My arms needed to be firm against my torso. One of the doctors turned away, and when he turned back around, in his hands was something that looked like it could be used in a torture chamber. There were rubber straps and 2 pieces of lead that, when you place them together, formed a sphere. I tried to sit up so I could see what he was doing, but was quickly forced down by the hand of the other doctor who was telling me to relax. It was like Leatherface telling you to relax while he cranked up his chainsaw. While one man held the 2 pieces of cold hard lead around my genitals, the other struggled to connect the rubber straps. My skin was pinched several times, and for a moment I thought it would be called off because I just couldn't get it. But in the end it was completed, and I laid there naked with a lead ball harnessed to my genitalia, my arms across my chest, and my mind running as fast as it could out of the hospital into the parking lot and back into my car. My mind ran, but my body was still on the steel table that was now being raised 10 feet in the air. The table shook slightly as it reached its mark, and I now hovered in midair, painted and nude. The doctors exited the room in a hurry. A humming noise began and the lights went off, and the only thing I could see was red lines all around the room that lined up with the painted grid of my body. The humming was deep and bassy. In seconds it was over. The lights were on, the doctors returned, and I was dressed and being wheeled to the front within an hour. The nurse wheeled me straight to the lobby where Miller waited. I spent the drive home with my head hanging out the window puking until I gave up and just sat inside without even attempting at the window because I knew there was nothing left. The window was down, yet no amount of cold air could stop my tears. After 6 months of treatment, I was given 2 choices. Choice number 1, I could return to my air defense unit and all would be forgiven. No extra duty, no collar lost. Choice number 2, I could drive away. But if I did, I would never be allowed to serve in the armed forces again. When I out-processed, the commanding officer that stamped my final document looked at me and said, "I hope you know how lucky you are." And the truth is, neither of us could have ever known just how lucky. On February 20th, 2002, I drove away from Fort Hood with an honorable discharge and a new lease on life. 13 days later, my unit was deployed and over half were killed in Afghanistan and Iraq. I would never have put going AWOL or getting cancer on a bucket list, but in the end, they both saved my life. And maybe that's the point. There are moments in your life that transform you, and 9 times out of 10, they were never part of the plan. Never on any list. Woo!